I think that times have changed, what with AI and, the things that are going on with cybersecurity and the kind of the invasion of our rights and our privacy through technology. You know what I've told you about prosecutor, judge. As a senator, I've taken over almost 14,000 votes. I have a conservative record. I'm a fighter. I don't miss votes. I care about this state. I want it to work better. I want to bring integrity to the office of the Attorney General.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? All of the announced candidates seeking the GOP nomination for Attorney General have been invited to participate in a Real Texans interview. Welcome to this edition of Real Texans, talking to men and women doing great things to help the Lone Star State shine even brighter. And sometimes that includes visiting with folks who hold or are seeking office, and you are currently doing both.
Correct.
Joan Huffman, State Senator from Houston, running to be our 52nd Attorney General. Thanks for sitting down today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So, for as long as I've known of you, it's always, you've always got the R-Houston beside your name.
Yes.
But I knew you had this quirk in your resume that you attended LSU. So of course I've got to harass her about LSU. A good Texas girl LSU.
Yeah.
But you were actually raised in Louisiana. Something complete. I thought I knew my trivia, but apparently I don't. So raised in Louisiana.
Yeah, New Iberia, Louisiana. So I'm a good old Cajun girl. Went to LSU and then later moved to Houston when I started at the Harris County DA's office, looking for a job with a history degree. And good luck.
And history there.
Yeah, and got a job as a secretary at the DA's office. That's how I kind of got started in the DA's side of it. But yeah, I grew up in Louisiana, went to high school at all-girls Catholic school, a good Catholic small town upbringing.
Right.
And so that's where I came from.
So moving to Houston, finish up LSU, you've got to have a job,
Yeah.
Got to eat eventually.
Yes.
What was it that attracted you to Houston in the first place?
Well, I had my sister and her family lived here, and I had been in and out of Houston before, sort of, and I think a lot of people were moving to Houston back in those days, right? So that was in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people were moving here and looking for opportunity and looking to start a new life. And that's what I came here for.
So you moved to Houston and I want very clear folks into this. You were a secretary in the DA's office.
Yes.
You weren't an attorney.
No.
You weren't a prosecutor, all the things that we've come to know about.
Yes.
You were a secretary in the DA's office.
Yeah.
Putting yourself through night school at South Texas College of Law. What drew you to law, I guess, first? What drew you to law?
Well, I've always been interested in law. And, when I applied, it was a little tiny ad in the Houston Chronicle. That's when you used to look for jobs in the newspaper. We're dating ourselves here. But anyway, and I thought, that sounds great. I thought I was going to be working for Johnny Holmes, like as his executive assistant.
Right.
No. I had a job in the, we call it the bowels of the criminal courthouse. And it was just the intake division. And that's where all the law enforcement officers would come to talk to the prosecutors to see if they could make their case. In the old days, there weren't emails and they didn't send things through the computer. They would have to show up in person, talk to the prosecutors. And they would a lot of times have their inmates with them. So the inmates would sit there on the floor. The lawyer would be in the office next door. I'd be there at my little typewriter, typing up the information or the indictment. So I started learning a lot at that point about the criminal justice system, about working with law enforcement. And I just loved it, of course. I was fascinated by it. So I started going to law school, kept doing that, doing the graveyard shifts on that, and then worked as a legal intern where at that time, all the domestic violence victims had to come directly and tell their story to the DA. The cops didn't take those charges. That was a long time ago. And so I would meet one-on-one with those women and men sometimes, and kind of got a taste for working with victims. And so when I graduated from law school, I jumped in and they hired me at the DA's office as a prosecutor.
So it feels like, particularly, think of those days when, everything is print and paper and typewriters and ink and notepads and all those things. And so there's very much the messiness of crime and people kind of
Yes.
on their worst day,
Yeah.
whether as the perpetrator or as the victim.
Absolutely.
And it feels like that for an attorney or someone wanting to be an attorney, that either says to you as the secretary working, to put yourself through night school,
Yeah.
I'm done with this one, walk out, or it makes you really embrace it, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
I embraced it.
It's an extreme, one or the other.
I think there's some truth to that, Michael, but I loved it, and I could see that, you could make a difference in that position, and I just loved it. Some people will ask me sometimes, "What do you like best? Would you like prosecutor?" Because I was a judge later, being a senator. Oh, the prosecutor still pulls at me, because that was just, you were doing so many good things for good people and victims and making a difference, but it was also fun. It was just fun to get in there and fight.
You could see the reward.
Yeah,
You could see the benefit.
yeah. You just, you get in there and fight, and that was a good feeling.
Okay, so you go from the bowels of the courthouse building to you ended up as the chief felony prosecutor for the Harris
Yes.
County District Attorney's Office. I think I remember reading at one point that you did well over 100 trials,
Jury trials, yes.
which is for a lot of us think, there's 350 days here, whatever. But that's a massive number.
That's a lot of jury trials. And remember, peppered wind, you're still in court every day. You're doing lots of court trials, motions, plea bargain, agreements, and all kind of work in court. These are actually trials before juries. And then I was also served as the Organized Crime Narcotics Task Force, where I was embedded with the police officers who did all the major narcotics investigations. And that was still part of being a DA. I did that for a while. I worked as a special crimes gang prosecutor. During that time period, I was also trying death penalty cases. So I had several people on death row. Several have been executed, and rightfully so, I might add. And so, I did have a lot of experience in that litigation side, being in the courtroom, dealing with other lawyers, police officers, victims, judges, which is very important. And so I did that a long time.
One of the things is significant about that aspect of your very impressive biography as the chief felony prosecutor. It's not like every day it's lawyer Joan walks in, types up her briefs. There's an entire team of people, many of whom also have designs of someday being the chief felony prosecutor,
Yes.
being the district. And you think of lawyers, think of big egos, and so it's a whole lot of people managing in addition to comforting the victims, going after the bad guys, getting justice served.
Right.
That's a lot of balls to keep juggling up in the air.
Yeah. And remember, dealing with the judges and the judges back then, there were a lot of Democrats, and there were some good judges and there were some bad judges. And, you got to kind of deal with that. And, it was a little bit different world in the sense of how women were regarded, So there was a lot to deal with. But again, it was always fun. And it was always rewarding.
So at what point in there did you, I assume there had to be a conscious at some point where you were looking at your future.
Yes.
And you're thinking, all right, do I want to keep status quo, which is usually the easiest thing to do.
Yes.
Maybe be the boss.
You're right.
Harris County DA.
Yes.
You chose to run for judge in 1990. Again, when Harris County was, not exactly a friendly place to a Republican running.
Right.
It was maybe some ways friendlier than it is today.
Yeah.
Walk me through the process of how you decided to go from being a prosecutor to seeking a judgeship.
Well, you're right. Back then, the Republicans were really just trying to get their footing in Harris County. And that was 94, we started making some inroads. We were slowly making inroads. And, I was approached by people in the party and so forth who were looking for they really wanted prosecutors, very experienced prosecutors, to move on and show that, hey, Republicans can make really good judges, Right. And frankly, they were looking for females too, because they wanted, and there were several of us that we ran together, that we were all very experienced prosecutors. We ran as a team, sort of, and we got out there and just worked. And so that's kind of how it went into it. it was a good decision because it was a good next step in my career, and I was able to bring some really good experience to the bench and start to turn these courts around because they'd gotten really backlogged with cases, kind of what we're seeing now with the Democrats that have taken control over Harris County.
Right.
Things moving slowly, a lot of the decisions a little questionable, and so the Republicans got in there and, hey, guess what? We made a difference and we cleaned it up. So
I'd be interested in your take on this because a number of friends over the years who've been prosecutors, friends who've been judges, and it feels like that is a position where you have to be able to compartmentalize because, again, there are moments when you are seeing some of the very worst things a human can imagine.
yeah,
But you still have to go to the grocery store. You still have to interact with
yes,
spouses and children and all these kind of
Yeah,
things in a somewhat normal way. How do you do that?
Well-
How did you do that?
Well, it was hard, but I think compartmentalized is probably the secret. And it's funny that you picked up on that because that's actually when the Senate seat later became open in 2008. That was one of the things that made me sort of decide to move on. And I had, my son was young at the time, and I wanted to spend a little time with him because, when they're little, it goes so quickly.
It was very,
very quickly,
horribly
quickly. And it was part of that. It was just to see just the worst part of society so often and such grief and such trauma, such carnage. I mean, really carnage. And I knew I wanted to serve, but I sort of just moved on and was going to look around to see what was next.
Right. So what was next, of course, was Kyle Janik moved out of the Texas Senate, creating a need for a special election. If memory serves, there were 6 folks running in that.
I think that was, yes, that's right.
It was a special election.
And it was
4 of whom were Democrats.
Yes.
Then you and 2 Republicans.
Yeah. And remember, that was the first year that Obama ran, right? So there was this huge turnout.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris Bell was the big Democrat in the race. I'm sure you remember that because it was a heated election. And I got in the runoff, and then there was that December, runoff election, and the people came through for me, and I was elected. And
was it a relief to be elected, or do you looking back think, oh boy, maybe Chris? No, only kidding.
It was great to be elected. It felt like quite the victory because I was not the establishment candidate. I'm sure you remember that. It was a nasty fight, and they weren't so sure about me. I was new and just hadn't been part of legislative circles or the establishment circles. I'd come from the prosecutor's office, been a judge, done my worked really hard, just kind of went in with that. The in-group with the Republicans at the time. But I proved to them I could do it. So
well, and in fact, that's where kind of the downside in some cases for prosecutors, for judges, you kind of get the reputation. Oh well, he's a prosecutor. And you were a criminal court judge. So
yes,
very easily be okay. That's the law and order gal.
Yes.
Probably can't balance a budget. Probably doesn't know anything of anything else.
I remember someone telling me, we want someone who could be the chair of a committee one day. And I thought, maybe I could do that. And you know what? I proved to him, actually, I can. Yeah.
So during your time in the Texas Senate, you have had, I guess, put upon you, and you've taken on a couple of big tasks, including redistricting.
Yes.
Back in 21.
Yep.
Including now serving as the chair of finance.
Yes.
Might sound like a punishment sometimes. Some of those meetings, the way they go on. How have those positions prepared you now for being the Attorney General of Texas?
And of course, those both have. But I think it's important, if I may, start with the first one, when I was chair of state affairs. And that was when Lieutenant Governor Patrick was first elected. Remember, I worked with him as a senator for 2 or 3 sessions. Mm-hmm. And then he became lieutenant governor after Dewhurst moved on. And he made me chair of state affairs. And so if you remember, all his conservative priorities went through state affairs. I shepherded all those through state affairs for him. My first state affairs hearing, we did open carry and campus carry, very first one. And so, I have that experience of just, I passed the first voter ID bill that actually stood up in court as chair of state affairs. I could go on, but the drift is lots of conservative legislation that I learned to, work with the other senators. Now, sometimes we got stymied in the House, those stories, but we were really good at bringing the senators together and getting a lot of great things done. And then chair of redistricting, of course, the AG's office is, pretty much the lawyer for the state in redistricting. I've worked closely with the AG's office it's a very long process in redistricting. It seems now, because of the new stuff that has happened recently, that people are forgetting that was a very long process. That actually drew the legislative maps, not just the congressional and the SBOE maps. That's been through a very lengthy, long lawsuit that is still ongoing.
Right.
Still pending before the court. So I can talk about it. I can't go into great detail. But
in fact, it's very likely that whoever is elected as the Attorney General in this next election will be dealing with
still that and dealing with the new maps.
Yeah,
because that keeps popping up. And, it, for obvious reasons, it's a big political issue, and it's very, very important to the people of Texas. And so that was interesting. I learned more than I probably ever thought or dreamed I wanted to know about redistricting. But there I was, and I was in federal court testifying for 4 days. I don't recommend that to anyone. With three federal judges, and then finance. Of course, that goes on for months even before the session starts. People don't realize it, but it's probably nice for your viewers to know we actually go through every line of the state budget.
Right.
It's got to be balanced. Can't spend more than you have. We have spending limits that we adhere to. We've always been below the spending limits. There's a lot of big priorities in the state and a lot of people asking for things, and it's the most important thing in the world to them. But I've been through every line of every state agency, the very state agencies that the Attorney General defends and needs to know what's going on in those agencies, including the Attorney General's office itself. So, their money for the outside counsel, some of the lawsuits they've taken on, the personnel they need, the different, human trafficking task force, their task force, we help fund and make sure all of that's taken care of. So a lot of experience under my belt.
Well, and it feels like, I think a lot of folks, we've all gotten very accustomed to the fact that the Senate Finance and House Ways and Means and House Appropriations really do go through all these items, because that's a new thing in Texas. That Talmadge Heflin in the Texas House, another Houston guy. Back
I remember him.
Steve Ogden, the first who was the Republican finance chair. Both of them were the first two guys to ever say, "We want to see every line," and that shocked people. And now it's kind of the standard. If you're coming in as a Republican, you're expected to do that.
Right. And, I tell
the power of precedent, I guess.
Exactly. And the work group chairs, because I've started along with Jay Nelson did it before me, and I worked on those work groups. So we break, the groups down. So they're looking at certain parts of the budget. So it put several senators where they have the time to dig in, and they bring agency heads in. And boy, there's some sweating that goes on in those offices because we do ask a lot of questions. And of course, then we have to agree with the House and we have to work with them. But this last budget, I was able to get out 31-0. And that's because we try to listen and we try to meet the needs of all Texans as best we can under the constraints that we have. So
with all of that, how does that prepare you to be an attorney general? How did that, from whether it's being a secretary in the bowels of their courthouse to the chair of Senate Finance? What are the elements you see out of the positions that help inform the way you want to be an attorney general?
Well, everybody brings their own unique experiences, right? And I think, and in fact, I would be the first AG in the history of Texas that had been a prosecutor, a judge, and a longtime state senator with chairmanships that are meaningful, right? No one's. You can look around, and they've been men, all men, and we've had a Supreme Court justice, we've had a civil court judge, and most of them, went on to run for higher office. I mean, one went to federal prison, so you can say, got to throw him in there. He was a Democrat, yeah. Okay, so we sort of throw that in there, but I bring something different to the table, and I think everything that I've done brings a different kind of skill set, whether it's working with law enforcement, which I've done across the board,
Right.
whether it's learning to negotiate and deal with very complex legislation. Remember, I passed all the pension reform in Texas, including the Houston pension reform, which, they say saved Houston from bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to think it's not, try to deal with a bunch of police officers, firemen, municipal workers, Sylvester Turner at the time, the whole business community, and convince the voters to vote for a bond, because I said this has to have voter approval, and it did.
Right.
I use those as just some examples of complex issues that deal with many different personalities and very, very powerful people, and have managed to get people to sit down and work. I bet there's been a lot of battles over the years. Even when I was a judge, I was sued by a death row inmate and drug into federal court, and with the death row inmate across the table from me,
Wow.
When I was a prosecutor, I had a death row inmate come across the table and lunge at me. So it's just a lot of, and I don't know if that's more
So
scarier.
a state agency head yelling about his budget isn't
Like,
as big a deal.
whatever, bud. Yeah, I've been there. But so all of that is important. And, what I want to do with the office is really turn up the volume on the law enforcement, what we can do, how we make Texans safer. I really think, the stuff Paxton has done has been great. The federal, fighting against federal overreach, election integrity, doing everything we can to secure the sanctity of our elections, to go after these woke corporations who, hurt Texans, or whether it's Google who's going into our private area. I'm so paranoid about that. But also just, the opioid epidemic and how we were trying to get some of that money back to help the Texans who've been harmed by that. Oh, that's critically important, and things that I would pick up the mantle, keep doing that. But I think there's more we can do as an AG, and I think my long-term relationship with law enforcement and prosecutors, there's been some trust lost over the years. We just don't, the resources that should be able to be given to the locals to deal with, transnational and crime against children, cybersecurity threats. With AI, it's scary what's going on out there. Medicaid fraud. We hear President Trump talk about, what's going on, DOJ, they want to clean all that up. We could be hugely helpful in Texas. So we have a large chunk of the Medicaid money. And we used to be more aggressive about going after that. And because the feds do the big things, they leave the crumbs behind, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars or more. So really, use the law enforcement side of the AG's office. There's about 200 law enforcement officers there. Use them, give them the lawyers that they need so that we can be aggressive going against these. And some of the woke cities, the majority of the prosecutors in the state do a great job, but there's a handful we really need to watch. We really need to see what they're doing. I think there's one close by your neck of the woods right here who keeps not just dropping the ball, it's getting beyond that, really a menace to his constituents. And I passed legislation for judicial reform, so judges are accountable, and just to follow up on those kind of things. But let the locals know. Let us help you with your complex cases. Let us help you go in there and go after the human traffickers, to go after the fentanyl traffickers. I know I've been on these task force before. I know how to work with the locals, and they trust me. I believe, and I can build on that trust to make the AG's office more powerful, but more importantly, just be there to protect the people of Texas.
It feels like when we look at kind of the structure of kind of the I'll call it the prosecutorial wing of state and local government, that those who framed our government, the way the system kind of evolved over the intervening 100 years of our current state constitution, was kind of the assumption made that the local prosecutors were going to be able to get the job done, and the attorney general would kind of fill in some small gaps. But as it's turned out, as you mentioned, there may be bigger gaps appearing than we would have previously contemplated.
Yeah.
How do you work that, both from a just kind of doing it, which I think Ken Paxton has in some cases just done things, right?
Yes.
As well, though, as asking the legislature, hey, we need additional tools. How do you judge when's the time to just plow through, and how do you decide, well, this is a big issue, but we've got to wait for the legislature to patch up the wall first?
Right. And, that's a great question. And I do think times have changed from when, our founders initially kind of, as you said, envision what everybody's role is. And I'm very sensitive to the locals and understanding that they don't want to be told what to do. And there is such a thing as prosecutorial discretion. All that should be, of course, respected. But I think that times have changed, what with AI and, the things that are going on with cybersecurity and the kind of the invasion of our rights and our privacy through technology, that we have to up the game. There's an ongoing, the ongoing fight about who gets to prosecute election crimes. Some of that needs to be resolved and will probably have to be resolved legislatively. We tried to make some changes. We'll kind of see what the courts have to say about that. I will aggressively pursue in any way I can our right, if I see a role where the AG can, again, protect Texans, protect our elections, protect the most vulnerable people in our state. And the AG actually has a lot of power to do some of that, whether some of it's through deceptive trade practice, right? There are some businesses operating out there, even in the hemp industry. I see a way I know that's a big discussion, and we don't want to get into that, a big disagreement. But if they are out there and they are violating the law already, and they're deceptively advertising what they're doing and what's available, that's already in the purview of the AG's office. So that's just an example, but that would be a huge focus on mine, and I would be working on that from day one. I mean, it's a battle that needs to be fought for the people of Texas, and I'm the girl who can do it.
So, my last question for you.
Yeah.
You've stood for election a number of times.
Yes.
Both for judge, for the state Sen. What are questions that people like me, people like the folks watching, what are the kinds of questions we should be asking candidates for attorney general? What are the kind of questions we should be asking people who want to serve as judges? Oftentimes, we all get tongue-tied because, I don't know how do I judge who would be a good judge or not? How do I determine who would be a good AG? What are the right questions to ask? What are things we should be looking for?
Well, I would ask, why do you want to be AG? What in your background shows me that you will stick to something a long time, you will work your tail off, and you will get things done, complex things done. And then you look to see if they've actually done it. And I'm not going to say anything nasty about any of my opponents, okay? That's, a lot of people, that's not my style. I'm running in my lane. I'm going to run on my record. Look, you know what I've told you about prosecutor, judge. As a senator, I've taken over almost 14,000 votes. Michael, you've looked at a lot of those votes, right? Well, along with sponsored or wrote almost 500 pieces of legislation. I have a conservative record. I'm a fighter. I don't miss votes. I don't miss school. I work hard. I think I'm respected in the legislature. I know all the players in the state, and so ask them, why do you want to be AG? Well, I want to be AG because I want to continue to make the people of Texas state safe. I care about the victims. I care about this state. I want it to work better. I want to bring integrity to the office of the Attorney General. That's what I would say. What I would ask.
Well, Joan Huffman, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Thank you. And thank you for joining this edition of Real Texans.